Welcome back to the Anika Apple podcast. You might have noticed that a lot of our recent conversations keep coming back to the same core. Healing is required. It is our truth. And we know that when we are doing the work to heal, everything shifts in our lives. Healing is required before identity can truly stabilize. And as we've had many conversations over the last month or so about identity, I know it's central to your heart, and it certainly is central to mine. Identity is the thing that helps us crack the code on what it is that we are to do with our purpose. We cannot deliver our purpose fully without understanding who we are, because the two are connected. But a lot of times we have clarity about purpose because we can feel that pull. We understand what it is that we're here to do, at least some version of it. But we can't figure out why we are the person to do it or how we are equipped to deliver it. And that work hinges on you understanding your divine identity. Not who you tell people you are, not the titles that you borrow, but knowing the truth about who you were created to be. Healing is required before purpose can be carried without dismantling all of the things around you. Meaning that when you're grounded in your purpose, you can begin to expand all of what is yours to do and to be in the world. But without it, you will find that there are cracks and crevices in the foundation of the life that you've created. So as you know that we have been leaning into these conversations around identity, I felt that there was a piece that was missing. And I talked a little bit about narratives, and I want to dig a little bit deeper in today's episode about why the stories matter. Why the stories that you tell yourself have to be aligned with your truth in order for you to move forward in a way that has the kind of impact and creates the kind of opportunities that you are here to deliver your purpose in. You need to have all of those things, at least clarity about them, in order to be able to move forward. Otherwise, imagine the gears on a watch where two main gears are turning in the opposite direction. It's so easy to hold that visual in your mind and be like, well, clearly that doesn't work, yet we do it in our life all the time. We are constantly in these moments where we think that because we say a thing, we're just going to show up that way. And as much as I appreciate, my fellow healers who talk about things like manifestation and things like that, you absolutely create your experience. Don't get me wrong. But you've got to be clear about who you are having that experience. I can say a lot of words looking at myself in a mirror as an example and walk away not believing a single thing that I just said. Or I can believe it for a moment, but if I'm not convicted about it, the moment that something happens where I now have evidence to the contrary, it usurps everything that I did, all of the energy that I spent telling myself whatever it was that I said in that mirror moment. What we have to do is get clear about who we are, and then know unequivocally that even though we might not feel like it, even though all of the circumstances around us might not be aligned in the way we think they need to be, maybe we can't see it with our physical eyes yet, but we know that it is true. When you ground yourself in your divine identity, you rarely ever have all of the things aligned around you to show you that that is your truth. And I say rarely ever because I've worked on identity with a lot of people for decades. And the truth of the matter is, I don't know a single story where somebody says, oh yeah, something was revealed to me and I looked around and everything said, yep. What I do know unequivocally is that's not how God works. Typically, you're going to have some gaps to fill. It's like the person who gets a pair of shoes as a gift that are a half size too big. If you wear them now, you're going to do some damage. You're going to have some impact, right, to your foot. You're going to be moving around in that shoe. But if you give it time, that you'll grow into it. If you're still in a growth stage, eventually you'll be able to fit them. But you don't want to force it. You want to understand that there's something that has to happen physically in the body, that if you're young and you're growing into these shoes, there has to be something that's happening to continue your growth pattern. So without growth, how can we step fully into the new identity? And this is where our stories get stuck. So I thank you for joining me for this week's episode of the Anika Apple podcast. I'm really excited about this episode because at the end of the episode today, I'm going to share some big news with you. So I am glad that you are here for the ride. But I want to spend some time today talking about what happens when we do not change the story. As a leader for many years, I found myself always striving to be exactly who I believed other people expected me to be. And you heard me share some of those sentiments and stories that I know that you can align to in the episodes that talk about who were you before the world told you. But today I just want to get deep into why we experience things like burnout. What's really happening underneath and what needs to shift in order for us to come out of that pattern. As someone with undiagnosed ADHD, but I am so clear, I don't need to look at another assessment ever to know because I live with myself every day. I know and I recognize that the way my brain works is different. I understand that systems that I've tried to tap myself into for years don't work for me. I also know that whatever story I'm telling myself about my experience blows it up to be even bigger than what I would just think if I was just dragging myself through that day. So if I say to myself all of the time, I'm procrastinating, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I don't feel like I have capacity for this, I'm not sure if I know how to do this, if I'm telling myself those stories all of the time, I'm exacerbating that experience even more. And all that needs to happen is one of the neurodivergent ways that I think and operate to show up. And then I am just off down a rabbit hole. Because now I have the evidence that whatever I'm saying to myself is not true. There comes a moment where we recognize that we can no longer operate in the way that we have been. That shift is something that is so important. And for so many of us, it's like hearing a timer go off on the oven and you can just continue to let the thing keep going, right? Over time, we get desensitized to the things, the triggers, the signals, the things that pop up for us, the aches in our body, the feeling of exhaustion or overwhelm. And we tell ourselves these stories that we have to keep going. Oh, I can't leave because if I do, then XYZ won't happen. Or I don't have someone to take over for this. Or I just need to do these 3 more things and then I'll be able to walk away. And I don't know about you, but I can tell you, for me as someone who hits another stride in the evening, like that burst of energy that I get at night, I can take that thing and ride it into exhaustion at 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning because I'm energized by what I'm doing. But all the while, my body is like, no, stop. It's time for you to rest. And the pattern of that behavior then creates an impact in the days to come. One of the things that happened for me personally, for those of you who know and understand the dynamic of the kind of divinely led work that I do, it means that even as I am in a time of prayer, the amount of energy that I am expelling, what's happening to my physical body, the level of exhaustion that I can feel after that is really hard to put into words. I struggled with it for a long time for myself. And like, I was in here for 90 minutes praying or meditating and I feel tired. Why? How would that be? Because the energy that I have when I'm communing with God is amazing, right? It's like, it feels so full and I feel on fire and all of this stuff and all of this excitement. And a lot of times when I'm receiving revelation, it's like, good, I got it, and now I'm ready to go put it into place. And the truth of the matter is my body's like, so there was a lot happening right now, and I need to rest. We don't understand that when we continue to push ourselves past the point where we needed to take a break, where we required rest, that the implications happen days or even weeks later. What I found for myself is as I moved and grew in my spiritual understanding of who I was, in the midst of all of these other life changes that happen, relationship changes, moving, kids starting at a new school, all of those things, I hit a wall like nothing I had ever experienced in my life. And I called that time overwhelm and burnout because those were the words that I knew to use. And I worked with my doctor and then through a program and had a multitude of support, behavioral coach, therapists, to help me navigate through that time, to understand what was really happening. And I was really blessed that the people that I worked with understood my gift. And I know that is not everyone's experience. For me, thanks to God, the people that came to surround me and support me understood who I was. And even if they didn't understand my exact experience, they understood enough to be able to support me in recognizing that what was happening was not just physical, emotional, or psychological, but that it was also spiritual. And the exhaustion that I felt as a result of all of those things happening put me in a place that I could not just get up and keep going. And I'd never hit that before. Most of the leaders who are really tapped in to show up in the way that God has created them to be, who may be operating fully in their identity and purpose, or maybe like, I'm getting close. They're feeling like they're connecting to the truth of who they are. They're feeling that level of exhaustion. And by and large, there are many groups who are like, listen, I've been doing this work so long. I've been carrying people for such a long time through the change and transformation. I think about the leaders of, religious organizations across all of the different sects. Like, there's so many different ways that they're supporting the people and the communities and even government and other initiatives. It's exhausting. It is a pull. It is a weight. And because we have not learned how to tell ourselves a different story about who we are, we trap ourselves in the cycle of behaving the way we've always been. For several months now, I've been talking about the time that we are in, the level of exhaustion, the importance of frequency and resonance, the importance of rest, which rest probably goes back a couple of years now. If we have the practices that we need, we can find ourselves in a place where we have the capacity to manage more than what we feel like we can in this moment. Simpler said, if you took some rest, when you knew you needed to take some rest, you might feel like you have a bit more resilience now. For many of you, you've heard my story about how God called me to rest, and I was like, how much more rest do I need? Because I don't have time for it. And then there was more, and then there was more, and then there was more. Why? Because there are years, there are decades where I didn't get real, true rest. And in much of that time, I was not operating daily in a prophetic capacity in the way that I do today. And I know some of you are like, but all leaders are not prophetic. Yes, you're right. But we are all human and impacted by energy. We are feeling the weight of this moment. We recognize what's happening. And as I've been saying for the last couple of months, we had our experience in 2020 with all of the culmination of all of the different things that were happening in front of us and things that were happening behind the scenes. And for many of us, we navigated through that time and went back into operating as we always had. For some, like myself, I made a significant choice to move out of corporate into my own business after taking some time to rest. I had no idea I needed way more time than what I planned for myself. But the truth of the matter is that being an entrepreneur has a lot of weight with it too. And we are still feeling the weight of what's happening in this moment. And for many, there hasn't been any time to heal or navigate through all of the things that have happened. A good friend of mine who has recently experienced a lot of back-to-back losses. The number has to be beyond what they could count on their fingers across the last 2 years. It seems like every month or so that there's someone else that is departing from this lifetime. And so imagine someone who has the capacity and has gotten to a great place of understanding and accepting the transitions when they happen. That doesn't mean you're not sad, doesn't mean you're without grief, but being able to be in acceptance is key. It's very different than someone who's really wrestling with their own mortality or wrestling with loss and grief and unable to get to a place of acceptance. So before you even have the opportunity to mourn and truly feel like you get to a place of acceptance with one, here comes another, here comes another, here comes another. And what I know to be true is that depending on where people are with their faith, it makes a huge difference to how you navigate through those moments. This is not to say if you're someone of great faith that you don't experience grief. I'm not saying that at all, but what I am saying is you also understand something bigger. There's something that is helping you to move towards a place of acceptance that is much more difficult to have if you don't have the thing which connects you to people that is bigger than what we experience here on a physical plane. When we don't do the work before the next thing comes, and then the next thing comes, we cannot expect anything other than to be in a state of overwhelm. We're going to feel like we are spinning out of control because indeed we are. We're going to feel burnt out because indeed we are. And if you know, like I know, by the time you get to state and name those things, you are so far beyond the actual moment where you really could have pulled yourself back from going through it. One of the stories I love to share is about this time before I took the last corporate role that I had. And I was sitting with God, and in short, I kept having this dream over and over again. And I kept seeing Jesus reaching out for me, like saying, get out of the boat. And fast forward, I'm sitting with God and I'm like, look, I'm clear. I've seen the dream. I understand what you're trying to tell me. You are encouraging me to take a break now and not go back to work. And I had all of the reasons. I mean, I had a real good list. You would be in agreement, nodding along with me like, yep, Anika, I see why. You were like, I can't not work now. And God told me, and I quote, it's going to be hard. And I was like, I can do the hard things. It's okay. And my assumption was God meant like it was going to be hard, like work was going to be hard. But that's not what God was referring to. It was the disconnect. It was that you're not rested from all that you have just gone through. You didn't give yourself time to rest. And I have created for you an actual perfect container for you to take some rest. And you're choosing to throw yourself right back into the fire. It's like, the image that's coming to mind for me right now is wrestling, right? When people are tag teaming, right? It's like the person like tags the other person. They jump out of the ring, right? And let the other person in. And what's the first thing they do? Take a deep breath. Like they know I'm giving myself all this physical exertion. I've got to take some time to have some rest before I jump back in there. I'm going to look and watch what's happening so I can understand strategically what's the impact I need to make when I get back in the ring. But we don't believe that we deserve to have that time. And if we do believe it, then we don't think we can afford it. And if we can afford it, then we think that other people are not going to accept it. And we can keep going with all the reasons and rationale. But the truth of the matter is, you got to be able to pull yourself back. Leaders are experiencing burnout at a rate that is astronomical, and no one is naming it. Or are they? Because there was a stat over a year ago that said that was the next epidemic to come. And why? Because we work with a 24-hour on mentality. People are receiving text messages at 9, 10 o'clock at night. They're waking up and the first thing they do before they even stretch and just have a moment of gratitude for reaching another day, they're checking their phone to see what's on the agenda, who emailed me, what thing do I need to get back to? And we exacerbate this condition for other people by being unrelenting. There are places around the world. I love Spain. Ever since I heard the idea of siesta when I was in Spanish classes in elementary school, I was like, that's amazing. Where do they do that? Why isn't that here? But to create a lifestyle where there's pause, where there are breaks. I loved working with some of the people globally on the teams that I was a part of when they would share like, oh, I'm going on holiday. I was like, oh, cool. So we'll see you Tuesday after the holiday. It's like, no, I'll be gone for a month. I'm like, wait, what? The conditions that we create for ourselves are connected to stories because there's a story there that says, I need time for myself. I'm going to take time to decompress. And the more that story goes and grows, the more it becomes what's accepted. We've done the opposite in the country of the US, to be clear. Many other places around the world, but I'm here. I am most connected to the way that we have built things in this country. And I'm telling you, it is a recipe for disaster. Leaders cannot continue to work in the way that they are today and be disconnected to their identity and be operating outside of the core of their purpose. You talk about burnout, all of the other mental health conditions, anxiety, depression, stress that are related to operating in these kinds of conditions. Then add all of the things that are impending in the external environment and have a loss of understanding where they are in this moment. We all know what the idea of a midlife crisis is. But can we recognize that we are in the midst of an identity crisis that extends into every area of the world? You want me to prove it to you? For those of you that live in the US, is the country in an identity crisis? Because what we say and what we say we stand for and what we do, they don't match. The version of who we are in the world looks a lot different in the last couple of weeks than it did a couple of years ago. There's a continuation of change of who we're becoming that I would say a large majority of people are not aligned with, but yet are buckled in for the ride. This is why we can't afford to continue to be in a place where we don't understand who we actually are. Identity is connected to the stories. So if we keep telling ourselves stories that are limiting in what we have the potential to be, if we're allowing the old stories to continue to be perpetuated because every time we see evidence of something that doesn't align, we're going to find ourselves surrendering to who we have been rather than being in our divine identity. The other thing that I talk about related to this is the importance of giving ourselves grace, being gentle with ourselves. Sometimes I have the experience when I'm getting ready for bed, it's like I want to just spend a few minutes just decompressing from the day. And when I go into meditation, it's like it was an invitation for every thought, every open item, every conversation, every single thing to just come rushing in. And in order to navigate that, I have two choices, right? I can allow myself to get frustrated and be in a state of upset, or I can decide I'm going to be at peace regardless. So I'm like, okay, there's a lot on my mind. Let me write down all of the things that are coming up for me right now. I don't even think about them. I just write them, free flowing, throw them in my journal, a piece of paper on my nightstand, and let it go. And one of the practices I invite you to consider is after you've had your meditative moment, your gratitude, whatever your nighttime practice is, to make a decision about which one or two of the things on the list you want to have an answer to when you wake up in the morning. Be clear with yourself. I know I have a solve for this. And I'm thankful that in the morning when I wake up, I will have more clarity about it. I will know what to do, who to call, how to solve for it, where to begin. You can actually condition yourself to create those answers so that you can move forward in a way that is in alignment instead of wrestling against, instead of having the friction that you are creating for yourself. Dealing with overthinking is one simple example of how we can navigate in a way that gets us out of this pattern of experiencing burnout and overwhelm and stress and anxiety and all of those things. The other is what I just gave you in the example, identity. Because the truth of the matter is, you have to believe that you are strong enough to tell your mind, I'm going to dump this stuff on the paper and I'm going to bed with a clean slate. Or that when I declare I'm going to have the answer for this thing in the morning, I'm going to wake up. And when I do, I'm going to have exactly the answers that I asked for. That's part of standing in your identity, knowing who you are, owning your power, your authority. It is yours. So we remove the story that says, oh, I don't have the ability to have that level of clarity. I don't deserve to have a good night's sleep, so all these things will just spin around in my mind. And as I say that, I know you're like, I would never tell myself that, but watch when you go to bed. These are the kinds of things that are happening, these stories that are happening in the background that we don't upset, we don't stop them. We're not pausing them so that we can interrogate them and create a new story, which is required for us if we are going to heal the way we behave. To get in alignment with our identity, we've got to decide that this person who we know we are meant to be is worth being. That not only did God say we were worthy when they created us to be that person, but that there was something unique that we were to deliver to the world. And that by standing in that identity, we actually make things better, not worse. We actually contribute to the good. We actually shift the way that people need to experience things in the world because we show up with our gifts in full, aligned, and ready to create transformation and change. But it's the stories that we buy into that hold us back from owning that fully. The other advice that I share in my book is getting rid of this mindset that says, I should have known. I should have known. When I was dealing with my burnout and overwhelm, deeply anxious and depressed, I kept saying to myself, I should have known. Why didn't I see this? But I couldn't see it because the stories that I lived into were protecting that part of me being Anika Apple, that I kept going. I remember saying to my mom, like, I always can climb the mountain. I can always do it. And like, I keep hitting this wall. Like, I can't climb the mountain. I don't know what's wrong with me. Do you hear all of the things in that sentence? Something is wrong with me because I can't do what I've always done, even though all of these other conditions around me have changed. Well, of course, I can't keep climbing the mountain. I'm on E. And I can't run on fumes anymore. There's not enough. We don't give ourselves credit to recognize that all of these things, there's so many things that are changing around us. Why are we struggling? Why do we have to keep having conversations about healing? Because we haven't done the work to heal. Because we scratch the surface in so many situations and circumstances. Because we're not always our best advocate who says we got to go deeper. There's more. Because we think that, well, if I'm just this way, at least this will be better than where I was. Without recognizing we're foregoing all of who we have the capacity to be. And that minimizes the impact that we're making on the world for ourselves and the people around us. I watch people heal their relationship to themselves, understand their identity, and transform their organizations. I watch people transform their families. And I dare say that I will be here to witness hundreds of people who transform the world because they choose to do the healing work. It's required for us to get to where we desire to be. And quiet as it's kept, is really required, being on the healing journey, to have a life that is full of joy. And you deserve that. I want to say to you that our identity needs to be aligned with the stories that we're telling ourselves. So sometimes when someone has clarity about who they are, they have a difficult time believing it because they cannot see that the stories that they tell themselves are actually leading over the identity. It's like suppressing it. For me, one of the things that God did in my experience was provide some really unique and different things for me so that I would see them as physical reminders of who God says I am. One of the things that God did for me, and I love the brilliance of God because God meets all of us where we are, right? I would often say to God, like, I hear you, but can you send it through a person? Cause I hear you, but I want to hear it. Like, this is so what I desire, or I can't even be certain that you actually mean all of this for me. Like, I can't. And so God would send me a person to say the very thing that God had said to me. And one of the things that God did for me in this season, as I had been embracing the identity that God revealed to me a couple of years ago, was give me somebody very close to me who I know well, who I am so clear understands and walks with God in a way that they hear like I hear. They experience God in the way that I do. We can have a conversation, the two of us, with God, and be coming up with the same things, share a vision. And the person said, here's who God says you are. And I was stunned. Because it's exactly what God said. And so as I've asked God to send me a person to confirm different things for myself, I don't need that confirmation for other people because the other person confirms it, right? But for myself, like, I want to hear it from a person too. As I would get that confirmation, I would be excited, right? But with this identity confirmation, I was like, oh gosh, now somebody else knows too who I am. But it has been the biggest blessing. Because in moments of questioning, I get to hear from another person who I know hears from God. This is who you are. This is who you are. But nothing, Anika. This is who you are. What did God say to you? Because I know what God told me is this. And as I have that confirmation about who I am, about what the experience is that I am meant to give and deliver to the world on God's behalf, I cannot question that I know what is true. Having the understanding of who you are, understanding your identity, having the confirmation is priceless. So the ways that God helps you to see who you are, for me, having physical, and God literally said to me, you needed a physical reminder of who I have called you to be, and I did. I also needed the voice of this other trusted person in my life. All of those things helped me to pressure test the stories that I was holding about who I am. As a matter of fact, a couple of weeks ago, I was having a conversation with a really dear friend of mine, and they said to me, I was talking about the potential impact that I worried about having in someone's life. And they said to me, how could it be anything other than divine when you know who you are and how you operate for God? Do you really think that God brought you to this connection, and it very clearly was a God connection, if there was nothing but good coming out of it for you and the other person? These things, the ability to understand who you are and interrogate the stories, are critical. There was a story that I was holding that if it didn't look a certain way, that it might create an impact that was adverse for that person. And I never want to do anything that is going to cause harm for another person. But the truth of the matter was, as God begins to reveal more and more about what that interaction is meant to be, I'm so certain about the beauty of what God has created. I've changed the story. We have to move into a place where the stories that we are telling ourselves are grounded in the truth of who we are, foundational for our identity, as I said in the beginning of this podcast episode. The foundation has to be our identity, with the stories around it that support the truth of who we are. I'll give you a perfect example. When in the Healing Crusade, a couple of years ago, we did this work around changing our mindset of abundance. And I found that even as I began doing this work before running the challenge in the community, I was still finding that I was struggling. And what I recognized was, it wasn't what I was saying to myself. It wasn't necessarily in the behavior by itself, my behavior by itself, but the conflict was coming from the stories. So if a story for me was abundance looks like X, and I'm looking only at that specific thing, then I might have continued to believe that I am not abundant. And I'm chuckling to myself right now because God is like, tell them what just happened the other day. And I will. So there was a mismatch for me between how I defined abundance for myself and what I was observing, what I was looking for, because it was satisfying a story. And for those of you who are maybe not as familiar with this concept, the way the brain works is it wants to confirm what you already know to be true. It likes the evidence in the world to be collected to support the story that you already have. Meaning, you might have evidence of two things in front of you, and your brain's like, great, that works because we already are holding this narrative. That's how the brain believes it's keeping you safe, right? So what God was just sharing with me, I love you, God. I love God for this. I love that God brought me back to the example that just happened the other day. I wrote a journal prompt for myself. What would it look like if I truly believed that I lived a fully abundant life, and abundant in all areas? And as I sat in meditation with this, I was like, I feel like there's more I need to see, I need to feel, experience more. And when I let go, God just began to show me my life as it is today. I was looking for a future vision of like, what does it feel like in all of this like experience of abundance? And inevitably what God showed me is I'm living it already. What does it mean to live a fully abundant life? If I go back to my definition of abundance, actually, I am in it. There's nothing missing here. There's a continued evolution and growth of what that experience feels like based on the way I define it. My story now has to catch up, which was I'm waiting to be in a state of full abundance. My story is catching up to I am abundant, and this is an abundant life. And what God showed me was not perhaps what you might feel or hold for yourself as abundance. But for me, it was the relationships, it was love, it was being seen. It was all of the things that are being created in community around the work that I do. It was the opportunity to take this healing work further. It's all of those things that were coming up because now I can understand the truth of what's here in this moment based on the story that I hold around what abundance is. The story has to be aligned with the identity. So in my identity and knowing who I am, I also know that this identity, this person is worthy of abundance and is abundant. And knowing that means I get to walk in this life experience in a way that I have an aligned story with the truth of who I am. It's time for your stories to catch up to your identity. And the way that you get them there is by understanding who you are, knowing your identity, and then interrogating the stories that you're holding. Looking for the places where it's misaligned, being curious to understand how the stories need to evolve to support the truth of who you are. It's not enough to look in the mirror and say, I'm wealthy, and then continue to have patterns of how you don't take care of the money that comes into your hands, or how you squander it, or perhaps how you don't invest it. Or perhaps how you've not stopped to even understand what the divine strategy is in alignment with who you are. I hope you have found yourself in many places of this episode today. And because all of us are leaders in some areas of our lives, this applies to us. We will find ourselves in burnout and overwhelm because we are disconnected from the truth of who we are. Part of you that is so deeply aligned with spirit is like, this is who we are. And then there's the part of you that is living in the world today and pleasing and operating in a way that's in alignment with what you see people typically do, and there's misalignment there. And then there's the stories that are stuck on the old versions of you, which are trying to keep you in that place because it believes it needs to keep you safe. But of all of these versions, you know what the safest place is? Your actual identity. Because the truth of the matter is your identity is backed by God. Before we close the episode, I have two things I want to share with you. One, I want to invite you to check out Crowned, which is my identity and purpose one-on-one session. These sessions are incredibly transformational. I sit with God in preparation for the session to understand what areas of focus God has for you. I receive divine messages and I bring those into the session. And during the session, God speaks through me to help continue to reveal your identity and to expound on purpose. If you'd like to learn more about the sessions, you can click the link here in the show notes or find it on my website at anikaapple.com. The other thing I said to you in the very beginning of coming onto this episode is that I'm really excited about making a special announcement today. So over the last few years, this podcast has evolved. What started as conversations around leadership, purpose, transformation, and healing has come back to one central truth, that healing is required. It's not just the title of my book. It is the moment that we're in the world. And healing is required for us before we can really carry our purpose with integrity. It's important before we can stabilize our identity. It matters so that we can live in a way that's fully aligned with who we were created to be. And so to support all of that, starting next month, we're renaming the podcast to Healing is Required. I feel so strongly that this work is a continuation of what I've already begun. This podcast was always about leaders being able to understand who they were and to operate in an integrated way, trusting their divine knowing, their gifting, and allowing the full version of themselves to show up in all of the places and spaces, understanding and truly valuing and seeing their work. And I'm excited to continue to bring those stories to you with the kind of clarity that we need so that we can understand the importance that healing has in this mission. It's not that the purpose of this has changed. It really is that I'm more clear now than I have ever been about how all of these things work together. So I'm excited to share first with you that the podcast will be called Healing is Required. And we will be talking about all of the different topics in my book. And I'm excited to introduce you to guests and practitioners who have expertise in this space too, to further support you in your journey to heal and grow and to be the person that God created you to be and deliver the kind of impact that you desire to give to the world. And I'm grateful that you are walking with me into this next season and expression of who I am and what this work is meant to give to the world. If you've not grabbed your copy of Healing is Required, it's available on Amazon, barnesandnoble.com, all of your favorite bookstores. And you can also grab your signed copies on anikaapple.com or healingisrequired.com. As always, I wish you peace and blessings. Until next time.